This is the concierge, sir.
And welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Concierge Confidential. I'm your host, Brian Ortega, and hopefully you've been having a good week. So it just started. I think it's Tuesday when we're actually putting this out. But overall, awesome weekend. So I actually had my mom come in from Arizona, and we spent a little bit of time together. I saw my nieces, my brother. Saw them do gymnastics, which was not a Vegas-y thing whatsoever. But overall, fantastic weekend. But really, it's really good to go out and do things in the city because then it actually makes me think of things that I want to share with you guys here on the podcast. So I ended up going to see Hans Zimmer. He's a very, very famous composer. I've had to explain this to a few people over the week and the last couple weeks, who Hans Zimmer is. If you're not familiar with who Hans Zimmer is actually one of the greatest movie composers of all time next to John Williams. John Williams did movies like E.T. He did movies like Jaws. He also did Jurassic Park. I believe Schindler's List he also did. But overall, John Williams is an amazing composer. But Hans Zimmer, I'm just going off of my movie stuff. Hans Zimmer is known as sort of like the new millennium's great composers. So he's done things for The Batman, Interstellar, Inception, Jurassic Park, Pirates of the Caribbean, most notably. He did Thelma and Louise, which was kind of funny because I saw that on a movie and I was like, oh, it's Hans Zimmer. But he's done many, many movies in terms of the musical scores for them, and I got to see him live in concert, and I have to say it was an amazing experience. I finally got to tick off a bucket list item, which besides seeing him was also going to the Resorts Theater over at Resorts World, and I have to say, fantastic. So and I actually got there pretty close to the start of the show. So this particular episode's gonna explain the difference between residencies, concerts, and the difference in terms of arriving to them and how to approach doing these experiences. Just because I know when you're in Las Vegas, for the most part, is a pretty late arriving crowd. I think most people are late arriving, but overall, Vegas is a late arriving crowd for anything. So I'm going to go over what the difference is between a residency, a theater show, sort of like Ka and O, which those are like Cirque shows that have a very set schedule, and then concerts, obviously, that don't really have a schedule. They have a light schedule, but they do have, not as strict a schedule as others. So we're going to be diving into that and how to plan your trip if you're going to a theater here in Las Vegas. That is coming up next. Okay, everybody, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So we're going to be talking about theaters here. So what are the differences? So I'll do a quick explanation of the difference between a concert and a residency and, of course, a production show. So let's start with the beginning. So shows like Cirque du Soleil's Ka, O, Michael Jackson 1, these type of shows that usually have 2 shows a night, are pretty rigorous about their timings. So if the show says it starts at 7, it's for the most part going to start at 7 o'clock. Reason being is because they have two shows a night, and they're always timed out to a T. They're usually an hour and 30 minutes, pretty much on the dot, and they start at that time. Typically, you can arrive for those shows usually about 30 minutes before the show time. Usually not an hour, but usually about 30 minutes before showtime. So, for example, if you're going to see a show at 7 o'clock, the theater will usually open that space around 30 minutes before showtime. So that's for you to be able to get in, for you to be able to get popcorn, sodas, drinks, whatever, and then go into the theater. Usually the lines go really, really quickly, especially if you have your ticket already. Most of the time you have them on your phone. Most places are ticketless now, so you do have to use your phone copy. But again, just make sure your phone's charged. It's a really big deal just in general to have your phone charged. But these theaters tend not to take too long to go through. I would say that really the concession stand is probably going to be the longest part. But if you got in 10 minutes before showtime, you could probably get in. Don't know if you're going to be able to get your drinks and stuff before, but you have to be highly motivated. But these theaters typically are pretty self-contained. They don't usually let you go out and come back in. And again, the big thing about those, I would definitely arrive at least 20 minutes before your showtime for those production shows, just because you don't want to run the risk of being late. They don't have openers. They basically say the theater or the curtains go up and the show starts. They do not allow you to go in sort of in between when they have interactive moments with the crowd. So sometimes you're going to be waiting to actually go and sit at your seat. It's important to note for many theaters, any production show. So say you are going to see say you're going to see Ka, Awakenings, which is over at the Wynn Hotel. There really isn't a bad seat, especially for those big production shows that have huge set pieces. You don't have to be sitting really close to the stage. Most of the time, they do change the pricing depending where you're sitting. So obviously, if you're going to be sitting on the aisle, it's going to be more expensive. That's just the case. Towards the middles, it definitely gets more expensive. You can usually find these tickets pretty normal. They usually don't have resale tickets, and I wouldn't usually recommend purchasing resale tickets for regular production shows. But my mom always was not cool about purchasing resale tickets. But I do have to say, as we move into like the concerts and the residency conversation, especially concerts, that if you purchase through places like Ticketmaster, they're pretty secure, I would say. I haven't had an issue purchasing through Ticketmaster or AXS. The ones you do want to be careful for are places like StubHub and those kind of resells, just because they're not always like licensed. And the thing is with Ticketmaster in particular and AXS, those are the actual companies that work or own these theaters. So if there is an issue, you can speak to them and you're all speaking kind of the same language in terms of the technology that you used. So that's just coming from my history, my experience selling tickets. If it is the same system and they speak the same language, it's much easier to be able to resolve your problem if it's that way. Because the thing is like your name will be on the tickets. If there's an issue, you lose your ticket. That's how you're able to purchase them. You're purchasing everything lock, stock, and barrel. If you purchase third-party tickets, places like StubHub or Bravo Tickets or things of this nature, it does not change the ownership of the tickets in terms of, the actual physical, what's on paper. Because, for example, if you're purchasing tickets for, let's just say, a boxing event, and they're bought by John Doe, when you go purchase them from Bravo Tickets, you're going to purchase them or you purchase them through John Doe, and the name on the tickets will still be John Doe. You now own the tickets, so, good for you. You're just hoping that person doesn't resell those tickets and somebody does it, but things like Bravo Tickets and Las Vegas Tickets are usually licensed for other licensed brokers for the city of Las Vegas, so you shouldn't have an issue. But places like StubHub aren't always the same, especially when you do like general admission tickets. What'll happen is they'll buy like a batch. They'll buy like, let's just say 30 tickets, and they'll all be under the same person's name because it'll pop up on the same account. We'll look for the tickets. We can see if they've been scanned or not. So if somebody went in before you and scanned that ticket, then you can't get into the show. Essentially, we have to contact the owner, which they'll never answer. And even at that point, we aren't able to go find the other person unless you go find them yourself. So be careful with places like StubHub and that kind of thing, just because, again, we don't have direct control of it as the operators of that theater. So it's not always the most pleasant experience trying to figure out how to deal with those ticket issues. So, again, if you're going to go see a production show, want to be there at least 20 minutes before. 30 minutes is aggressive. 20 minutes is good just because, you can see how, busy it is. 15 minutes is doable, but then, you're going to start really pushing, getting into the theater itself. So those are production shows. So let's move on to residencies. So residencies are the ones that get really kind of confusing for people visiting from out of town, because everybody always thinks like, oh, that's a singer, it must be like a concert. They essentially are, because they are singing and you're experiencing it sort of like a concert does, but they're also sort of like on their timeline. They tend not to start always on time. And the thing is with residencies, they don't always have openers. It really just depends. For the most part, when I go see a show like a residency, for example, what did I see? I saw Cher. Cher doesn't have Cher didn't have an opener. I know Elton John, which that would be a concert, did not have an opener. So most of the time, these residency shows don't have openers. If they do, it's usually somebody from the band, and it's not going to be like a huge deal. So you do want to be there pretty prompt, and they typically open their tickets or their doors about an hour before showtime. Residencies and concerts work similarly, but the time is quite the difference. So residencies, the doors will open, for example, for a show at 7, they'll open at 6, get seated, sit down. Residencies typically take place in much larger theaters, like Ka, for example. Ka, which is a production show. It held almost 1,500 people, which is a pretty decent sized theater, so about 12 to 1,500 people. Places like Caesars has about 5,000 seats, so it's considerably larger, but it does take a lot more people to get up to the different tiers and different levels. So again, just keep that in mind. But again, you don't have to show up an hour before time. That's excessive, but some people do. But it's really just to sort of alleviate the people coming into the theater. So residencies are shows that happen frequently over time, so weeks and maybe months. So like Adele, for example, she was a residency. So she was pretty prompt. She was usually about 15, 20 minutes late. And I want to just reiterate this. 15 minutes is pretty normal. 20 minutes is, getting there. But 10 to 15 minutes after the actual scheduled showtime is pretty normal. Just because we typically have a late arriving crowd. I don't recommend you be late, but people are able to get there, a few minutes after the showtime. So typically, residencies can be a little longer. Residencies tend to last between 2, maybe 2.5 hours. Depends on the singer. I know Adele performed for like 2 hours and 45 minutes, maybe 3 hours, which is quite a long time in Las Vegas. Sometimes residencies will be as short as an hour 30, an hour 45. I remember when I went to go see Maroon 5 in concert, and their concert was boom, in and out, like an hour 30. So they can vary in range. When I saw Hans Zimmer performed for like over 3 hours, which his was sort of a hybrid just because he's actually a concert, but I saw it in sort of like a theater setting. So he's actually coming back to Las Vegas on October 12th. But for residencies tend to be people like Carrie Underwood and so on and so forth. They typically will have 2 shows during the week. They used to do 3. They used to do one like on Wednesday and then one Friday and then one Saturday. Pretty rare. They really don't do that anymore. It's usually 2 days, which is Friday and Saturday, because those are the big money days. If they perform on Wednesday, they tend to cancel a lot on Wednesdays, and sometimes on the last day of the week because their voice goes out. So usually you just got to be careful when you're booking those tickets. But those are residencies, and those are great. So let's move on to the concerts. So concerts are always the fun one. Actually, before we get there, I'll wait. I'll wait till I tell you my story when I actually tell you when I went to go see Hans. So for concerts, much different venues. So venues that would have concerts are places like T-Mobile Arena, Allegiant Stadium, MGM Grand. Funnily enough, the Sphere counts as sort of like a residency theater. We don't actually distinguish them this way. It's just the way that I'm kind of explaining them to you, that these are where these venues are. So things that take place at T-Mobile Arena, that would be considered a concert. Nobody has a residency at T-Mobile Arena, unless you count George Strait, who comes every December. That will be counted as a residency. But for those ones, I would certainly recommend showing up at least 40 to 30 minutes before your showtime, just because it's a much larger space. T-Mobile Arena has about 20,000 seats. MGM Grand Garden Arena has about 15,000 seats. And you just kind of have to, I think it's like 12,500 if I had to guess. But it takes much longer to get through security just because there's an extra layer of security. A lot of times the production shows don't have a security setup, but residencies and those theaters will. Let me go back really quick. For any place that takes place in a casino, really any theater, don't take a professional style camera. They do not like them. Sometimes you have to be careful about your bag situation, but typically production shows as well as residencies do not require you to use a special bag. You can usually just take your purse, Yves Saint Laurent, whatever you want to do. But you have to be careful when you go to T-Mobile Arena, Allegiant Stadium. They do typically have a clear bag policy. So I would just make sure you take something small enough that you don't need a bag, or have that clear bag ready to go. But those are for places like MGM Grand Garden, T-Mobile Arena, and Allegiant Stadium. And actually, I believe the Sphere requires it as well, a clear bag policy. So just make sure you read the tickets before. The tickets will always have like the bag policy, and they'll always have a link to tell you what you can and cannot bring. So again, also no weed. Stop bringing weed into places. But moving on, concerts can range. They typically can range between 2.5 to 3 hours, like I said earlier. They're usually these much bigger venues, and they're usually one-off. So usually only on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. It's crazy because Hans Zimmer was actually going to be performing in Los Angeles on, I believe, a Wednesday or a Tuesday, which to me is wild. But I guess people are going to show up regardless. But here in Las Vegas, if your show is on like a Wednesday, don't know what to tell you, kids, but usually Friday, Saturday, Sunday, those are the days that we have the performers perform, obviously. But that's sort of a rundown on theater stuff. Little note, I would recommend this. This is your pro tip, especially for those of you who do lots of concerts. You might know this, but walking into a theater in Las Vegas, when you walk into said theater, never go to the first concession stand you see, because you're probably not the only one. I always recommend you go to the furthest one away from where you are, and you'll typically find a shorter line, which helped me, especially when I went to go see Hans and I was running a little bit late. But typically that is sort of like the pro tip for you, is to not go to the concession stand right in front of you, go to the left, go to the right. Even if it's away from your sitting, I would highly recommend it. So that's my spiel on going to see these shows in Las Vegas. It's awesome. Love it. One of the best things about Las Vegas is our world-class shows, and I think it's definitely something you should try when you come to Las Vegas. But I wanted to tell a little bit of a story, because now it is story time.
May I tell you a story?
Okay, guys, let's go ahead and tell a little story here. So I ended up going to Resorts World with my mom. She didn't really want to see Hans, and there weren't a lot of tickets. I was really on the fence just because the next time he's in town where they have available seats that was normal is actually when my parents will be in town to see the Eagles. And I will be going with my parents to see the Eagles because that's what I do. I love to tag along, but I do it for the content. But I'm really excited to see the Eagles. But Hans Zimmer, who I love movies. If you've ever heard me talk about movies or read any of my work, places that I've written for, love film. And I really wanted to see him, and I didn't think I was going to be able to be honest. I saw the tickets come out for Resorts World. I was like, I'm never going to be able to purchase those tickets. They're so expensive. They were like $700 a ticket. But as you got closer to the event, you started seeing a lot more single tickets. And the cool thing about being single in Las Vegas is you get to get those single tickets that people are just trying to get rid of. And I was able to get those tickets pretty much at what face value would have been for that particular seat, which is pretty good on a resale site. I bought those through Ticketmaster. Yes, I know. The fees are terrible. But hey, you got to do what you got to do. But great seats for Hans. I was a little bit cocky when I was getting there because I went and I ate at Fountain Blue with my mom at Mother Wolf. She loved it. And we actually parked at Fountain Blue and then walked over to Resorts World because the Resorts World parking garage gets crazy for events. So ended up getting in. We ended up, eating, and then we went over, played a couple machines, had a drink. And by that time, we only had about 15 to 10 minutes to get into the theater. So I only had about 10 minutes to get into the theater because I got to the theater itself, and I was like, oh, I'm going to walk right in. Nope, you had to go in an actual huge line that went away from the theater and then all the way back. It moved pretty quickly, and then into the theater where you scanned. So then I walk in, and then when you walk into the Resorts World Theater, it has sort of 3 different spaces, and I found the space that was all the way to the left, which then I found a short line, which is nice. And as you're creeping up, I need you to keep your head on a swivel, man. I was just like, man, I was like, they're ready for you. So they worked really quickly, which is good. And then when you get to the actual drinks part, you can get any kind of weird drink you want. Totally fine. I don't care. And again, maybe you might want, we're watching the pocketbook a little bit, but just get a double. Just get a double, especially if you're in the middle of an aisle. Just get the double drink and then make life easier. Because the cool thing about when you purchase the doubles, a double shot of whatever, I get like a double Crown and Coke. They usually put more than double. But also, you usually get a really cool cup out of it. So you get like a really cool souvenir cup wherever you go. Typically, the cup is sort of like the cool thing you get to take with you. And this one was definitely awesome. It's a Resorts World cup that I can use for anything now. But it was quick. It was fast. We were in and out. And I was inside at my seat right at 7 o'clock. I'm very proud of myself for getting through all of that security, all of the concession stands. But then you sat down, and of course, really, really good seats. And the show itself, man, just kind of talking about the show was absolutely phenomenal. The theater is really cool. It actually is tiered. So they have a main orchestra. Then they have sort of like the back orchestra, which is underneath one of the first mezzanines. Then you have the mezzanine, which that mezzanine, if you're in the front, is good. And then they also have the balcony, which is on the top, or second mezzanine, if you want to be fancy. And that's quite far away. But overall, the sound quality inside of the Resorts World Theater is really off the charts fantastic. I had a great experience. It was loud. It's exactly how I wanted it. And again, they just delivered it. It was fantastic. But the chairs, real nice chairs, very large chairs, very, wide is what I'm looking for. They also have cup holders, which are right in the front, which is always nice for me as well. And the cool thing is that nobody sat next to me on my right side. I did have someone on the left side. They were a very good couple. Awesome. But it was great. So I didn't have to sit next to anybody at the show, which was fantastic. Lots of space, which is good. But it is one of those things like where I really enjoyed the music, and I think a lot of other people did because it sold out. But, man, the guy next to me, it's just so funny when you come to Vegas. This guy had to pay thousands of dollars for these seats, and because he probably bought them when they came out. And he fell asleep. He just fell asleep. For like 20 minutes. I was like, oh, my God, this guy. So, yeah. Don't drink too much. If you are going to see a show, everything's your prerogative. But, man, if you know that show is going to be a long one, like a comedy show or something of that nature, maybe just drink a little bit. I think I primed up perfectly. I had a drink at dinner. I had a drink right before I went in, and then I had the double drink while I was there, and it was perfect. Perfect little buzz to get me through the show. But overall, the show itself is fantastic. Would highly recommend see Hans Zimmer if he comes to a theater near you. And I think it was just a phenomenal experience for me personally, seeing one of the great composers do his thing. But he'll be back in Vegas on October 12th. I believe there's still seats. But the cool thing about the theater experience, especially places like the Sphere and the Coliseum, Resorts World Theater, obviously, they're sort of like these big concerts in these really confined spaces. And I think that's really, really cool, especially if you want to get this big, loud sound. I think it really, really jumps off of the stage at places like Resorts World. So the only place I haven't been to yet, I believe, is the Sphere, which I'll be seeing that soon. I'll make sure to share what that experience is like as you go in. But overall, fantastic. Just fantastic time at Resorts World. I ended up actually eating at their new salad bar, which they have, which I'm very excited about. I had a salad from there, and I loved it. So new salad bar over at Resorts World. They also have Junior's, which is a prime rib restaurant, which was extremely popular. But again, just for shows like this, I would get there, and they started a little bit late. I would get there at least, if the show was at 7, at least 20 minutes before showtime. That should give you plenty of time to do what you need to do. The only places that take a long time are like Caesars, but man, they work as quick as they can. But overall, fantastic experience at theaters. So if you come to Vegas, make sure you carve out some time to go one of these shows and just really experience just the world-class entertainment that our wonderful city provides. So this has actually been Concierge Confidential because we are now done with the pod. But if you want to follow me on Instagram at conciergeconfidential_LV, or on my personal one, which is Brian_Ortega26 for any of the stuff that I might be getting up to. And of course, follow us on TikTok at Keys to Vegas for all of our latest latest news and notes. I also did breakfast, which we'll talk about that on a different pod, but it was absolutely fantastic at a place downtown. Don't want to spoil it, but it's a little bit of a local spot, but it was really fantastic. So again, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all of you coming and listening to my podcast, especially if you come to Vegas and invite me out. Love ya. Really busy during the week, though, so sorry if you're coming during the week. I can't come out. But if you see me out in town, feel free to come say hello. And remember, keep it confidential.